Hello, everyone. Okay. Hello, all, and welcome. My name is Vanessa Chang, and I am a curator, writer, and educator. Today, I am speaking to you from Yelamu, also known as San Francisco, on the unceded territories of the Ramaytush Ohlone peoples. Today's discussion, a conversation with Marshmallow Laser Feast and Universal Everything, is brought to you by Immersive Arts Alliance. Immersive Arts Alliance is a San Francisco Bay Area nonprofit founded to encourage, develop, and present major works of public art in the Bay Area and beyond. With a deep commitment to diversity and to social justice, we also engage the public in vital forums and discussions about innovation, creativity, and culture at large, such as the one you are joining us for today. Today, I'm delighted to speak with two legendary digital art studios from the UK, Marshmallow Laser Feast and Universal Everything. We'll explore their methods, their accomplishments, and why they do what they do. We'll begin by introducing each of our discussants, on which they will share a little bit about their studio projects. After this, we'll expand into a broader discussion. For those of you watching, if you have a question, please feel free to pop your question into the Q&A box. If the timing is right, we'll bring it up during the conversation. If not, we'll get to it at the end of the hour during Q&A. Our chat is open as well, so you're welcome to message us directly. So first, I'd like to introduce Marshmallow Laser Feast. Based in London, Marshmallow Laser Feast is one of the world's leading immersive art collectives. Their work illuminates the hidden natural forces that surround us, inviting participants to navigate with a sensory perception beyond their daily experience. Fusing architectural tools, contemporary imaging techniques, and performance with tactile forms, they sculpt spaces that lay dormant until animated by playful investigation. Their work has been exhibited internationally, including at the Saatchi Gallery, the Lisbon Triennial, New Frontiers, and the Sundance Film Festival, the V&A, and other venues. Today, they are represented by their executive producer, Nell Whitley. Nell has a reputation for driving forward ambitious work in a variety of forms: live events, art installations, and digital media. She produced the critically acclaimed In the Eyes of the Animal and other mixed reality works, including Chameleon, A Colossal Wave, Tree Hugger, and most recently, We Live in an Ocean of Air and Sweet Dreams. Nell was awarded the BFI Vision Award in 2016, the first producer in the field to receive this award. Alongside producing, Nell has led a series of collaborative research projects with Marshmallow Laser Feast and has been awarded funds from UKRI, the Digital R&D Fund, and the Department of Cultural Media and Sport. Nell, would you like to share some of your work with Marshmallow Laser Feast with us?
Hi, yes, hello everybody, and thank you for having me. So I'm going to take you through some slides quickly just to show you a little bit more about what we do and kind of contextualize. I'm not going to share it with you, sorry, fail. Contextualize what we do for the discussion later. So thanks for the nice introduction as well, Vanessa. So as Vanessa mentioned, we're a studio based here in the UK, kind of out of London, but now spread across the UK and Turkey and various other places. And we use technology, as mentioned, to reveal various stories or hidden elements of the world. So I'm going to take you through a few projects to tell you more about that. This is the piece that we did at the Saatchi Gallery in London in 2018 and 2019, using virtual reality, breath sensors, and various other technologies to explore the relationship between humans and trees and breath, ultimately. So we looked at kind of what it means to, like, where does the human breath end and the tree's breath begin? We're really interested in the use of kind of animation, real-time technologies and other hardwares and softwares which allow us to kind of push the boundary of what we can see, feel, hear, smell, particularly kind of what we can see within these worlds. And we kind of believe that technology plays a role in revealing the invisible. So this is kind of a lot of what our work would center around. This is a piece which used it called In the Eyes of the Animal, as mentioned earlier, which we cited in a forest, which was about the perception of animals and how different animals see forests. But again, thinking about how do you take the technology into the place where we originally captured the scene, and but try and hide the technology as much as possible. We also believe in a kind of 360-degree 3D assets as the kind of master medium, and then we're really interested in what we can do with those assets there afterwards. So this is the same piece of work as I was just showing you, but on Ron Arrad's Curtain Call, which is a fantastic kind of piece, kind of 360-degree screen made out of hundreds or thousands of kind of plasticky spaghettis, that's not the technical term, which ultimately come together and make this really wonderful tactile projection screen. We don't just do things kind of in headset, you know, we're interested, like I said, we're interested in that as the master medium, and then how do you take that out? So mirrored rooms. This is a piece about space and being sucked into the center of a black hole. We most recently did a project called Dream, which was an online performance in collaboration with the Royal Shakespeare Company, the Philharmonia Orchestra and Manchester International Festival, where we created a motion capture stage down in the south of England and did 10 live performances of a show that was streamed ultimately using a big world we'd built, a virtual forest in Unreal. The motion capture stage was 7 meters by 7 meters, and the forest that you were in online was 7 kilometers by 7 kilometers. And we took you on a journey through that forest. We also use light, and we're really interested in public space and bringing people together in these, and when screen-based technology doesn't necessarily allow you to do that, light is a brilliant form for kind of encapsulating and bringing people together. So this was a piece done for the London Borough of Culture, but taking inspiration from William Morris's Patterns in Nature. And we also, you know, work at sort of sometimes in more kind of traditional VFX. So this was some mycelial networks that we designed for a really great film called Fantastic Fungi. If you're interested in mushrooms, I highly recommend that film. And then I think we might talk about branded project later. We're going from kind of the natural world into the human body and the kind of understanding the relationship between those two things. And lots of our work more recently, and with this is a particular project for a client called Thorn, was about the kind of inner body and how understanding how we reflect nature kind of on the inside. So looking at working with a digital medicine institute in Germany called Fraunhofer Mavis. We take their kind of their data or their kind of the kind of digital imaging techniques that they specialize in and explore how to turn that into kind of you know, interesting experiences for us to understand ourselves better. This is clearly not the human body, not all robotic. This is about smart cities, another project on, again, using big screens. This is a kind of 24-meter wide LED screen, mirrored top and bottom to try and take you into the kind of idea of smart cities. And then finally, a project we did, which is kind of using robotics and light and looking at refraction and the caustics in glass. And this is in the cellars of a Hennessy Moet in Cognac in France. So just a kind of very brief overview of the very broad kind of palette that we use of different technologies to reveal a kind of different aspects of the world and society around us. I hope that was 5 minutes, Vanessa. Probably not.
had to unmute myself. Thank you, Nell. That was beautiful, and we'll have more chance to delve into it a little bit more. All right, well, next up, digital art practice and design studio, Universal Everything, is a remote working collective of digital artists, experienced designers, and future makers. They form bespoke teams to suit each project from a global network of architects, engineers, designers, cinematographers, animators, musicians, and developers. They've worked with and for global brands including Apple, Google, Chanel, Nike, and Intel, and have also participated in exhibitions at the Tate Modern, the Barbican, and the Museum of Modern Art in New York. Today, they are represented by Interactive Creative Director Joel Lewis. As interaction designer at United Visual Artists, Joel toured with the likes of U2 and Massive Attack and helped to create large-scale public installations, including Volume, which saw pioneering multi-user LED interactions in the Garden of London's V&A Museum. In 2008, Joel co-founded the open-source craft, design, and technology studio Helicar and Lewis, as well as interactive collective Yes, Yes, No, where he pioneered architectural scale LED interaction, real-time projection mapping, and social network activated sculpture. Joel is a fellow of the Royal Society of Arts and teaches at the Creative Computing Institute in London. Joel, please share some of your work with Universal Everything with us.
Thanks, Vanessa. And Nell, you've set me a difficult time to beat now, so I'm going to see how quickly I can get through this. So hello, I'm Joel Gethin-Lewis from Universal Everything. What I'm going to show to you now is a couple of projects that I think are interesting, thinking about Universal Everything and some of the works that have gone before us, before finishing up with some of our most recent projects. So going way back to the 5th century BC, this is one of my most favorite recent discoveries, these Trojan arches from the Fire Temple in Greece. And when you think of classical Greco-Roman sculpture, you always think of these kind of white porcelain, rather austere objects. But the most recent research has shown that actually they were painted, and painted with incredible hipster texture patterns that you can see here. Here's Theseus abducting Antipope, and just this, I mean, look at the outfit here. It's quite extraordinary to think of the amount of color that was in the ancient world. Leaping forward another 2,000 odd years, the work of Giovanni Battista Bracelli and his book Bizzarri di Vari Figuri, or Oddities of Various Figures, 1624. Kind of extraordinary to think that these kind of reinterpretations of the human body were being sketched out in the 17th century. Here with some pets as well, and very convenient seats to sit on as well, built into their bodies. I think both Nell and I could do with those at various times of the day. And then these guys with their pet as well. Look at this, this kind of quite extraordinary, almost rail track structure, but a couple of hundred years before that was even possible. And I don't even know what these two are doing, so I'm just going to move on from those. Leaping forward to 1971, I think we've always been really inspired at Universal Everything by this idea of biological motion, and particularly our evolved sensitivity to it. And this came from the work of Gunnar Johansson, in the 70s, a Scandinavian psychologist and researcher who literally stuck light bulbs and other reflective light materials to people's bodies to see how abstractly he could express the human body in motion, to see how abstract and limited and low resolution, as it were, it could be before this biological motion, or this term of biological motion, as he called it, was prompted and was set off. And it turned out that it only needed a couple of pixels of light to actually trigger this evolved response, this evolved sensitivity that we all have as humans to other humans' movements, but also any natural or animal movement in the world. And this evolved response is one of the reasons that we're so interested in working particularly with the figure and the body in motion. Another powerful and important reference to us was the work of Myron Kruger and his work in the 70s and 80s about interacting with the body and doing silhouette-based interaction. And this is, this is way before the Microsoft Kinect or any of these other sensory systems came out. He had to build his own hardware, his own software, his own tools to make it all happen. But you can see this incredibly effective and evocative silhouette-based interaction going on here, where he's playing with this very low resolution critter object that he, as he called them, to play with his own body silhouette in real time. And that kind of real-time interaction is something that I'm particularly interested in. To finish up with this video place video, there's a little excerpt coming up where Myron went meta, which is one of my favorite things as well. So he starts playing with his body silhouette in real time, with his body silhouette as the thing that he was manipulating. So you can see here, he's actually manipulating his body silhouette in real time using his body silhouette, which is always delightful. Now moving forward to some of Universal Everything's work, this is a project called Super Consumers that we were lucky enough to complete in Seoul, Korea, in the infamous now Gangnam district of Seoul, which apparently is a very posh shopping area. I did not know this. And what we were doing was we were invited by the owners of a department store to create some content for this huge LED screen, which is on a truly architectural scale in downtown Seoul. So we were inspired by our love of figurative motion and the body in motion, and combined that with all of the things that you could buy at this fantastic multi-story shopping center. And the thing that was really interesting for me on this project was what happened when you start making things on this scale, that you're not just making a screen, but you're actually making a color and light source that then bled into the rest of the urban landscape. Moving on again to a project that we completed at the Barbican, a project called Future You, where we used machine learning and several sensors to be able to detect the body in motion in real time, and then present a constantly evolving, unique reflection of the body in motion that would be unique to each user, but also evolve in time. There's Mario Klingman there, one of the OGs of this digital world that we seem to find ourselves in. And you can see here the body actually forming, increasing in complexity before finally falling away. One of the most recent projects that I worked on was the Super You project, which was all about, and you can see me modeling here, this is my backup career if COVID really does pay parcel to all the work that we've been doing. So you can see me here modeling the app, which is basically one that takes again the body in real time, but this time not having to use a hugely expensive PC and sensor, all working on the iPhone in real time. And then just one more thing to finish up with. I think I've gone over my time. I'm sorry, Nell, you beat me. This was a visualization that we launched recently in collaboration with Hyundai and their motor studio in Busan, Korea. And this is a visualization of the cycle that happens going through the hydrogen cycle, which Hyundai have engaged with on a truly massive scale. So they're building vehicles, ships, buildings, and all the other things that are going to be working on using these huge hydrogen fuel cells. I love the caustics coming in here, and it totally reminds me of the project that Nell just showed in the Champagne Cave. So I'm glad that we've got some things bouncing off each other already. I'll just leave that playing for a second. Okay, now I'll stop. Thank you so much. I hope I came in and didn't go on for too long.
Thank you very much, Joel. So much to talk about in all your work. I suppose then let's begin this conversation by talking about some of the continuities that I at least see in both your studio work. So I see both of your studios a real fascination with and a connection between human beings and other living beings that share our world. I mean, you showed this interest in biological motion and universal everything. We live in an ocean of air also kind of envisions those relationships. And Matt Pike from Universal Everything said in another interview, we are interested in how human and living forms can be represented through the eyes of today's technology. So, you know, the world is obviously being incredibly impacted by climate change, and our attention must be drawn then to the networks and processes and systems that are really fundamental to life on Earth. So what would you say it is about these processes and systems that drive your art? You know, one might say that to work with code is very different from working with the natural world. So how do you think that these technological systems might foster new forms of understanding and engagement with the natural world? And what might you hope to achieve? And how might these non-human actors ultimately serve each other? I invite either of you to speak here.
It's a big one. Well, I mean, for us, it's pure fascination. I mean, what is technology better used for than to reveal things that you can't see with your eyes and your ears? And you know, like there's something wonderful about the world around us that we don't perceive. And so our directors are very much driven by, well, the work with the natural world anyway, which isn't exclusively what we do, but it drives us to seek to learn and understand more about the world. And we've always seen, since we kind of got the VR bug, you know, back in 2013, 14, whenever it was, we were like, what's the point in using this technology? We often ask that question, like, why do that? And often the endeavor is, well, because you can do something you can't do as a human, or you can reveal something, or whatever that might be. But I think it's got so much to give and so much to offer, right? It's not like you're choosing a narrow subject, it's the world. So let's better understand it. We're also really interested in embodied learning, and using sort of immersive technologies to do that. But I think it's a slightly separate subject to the question that you asked. But Joel, I don't know if you want to add to that, or...
I think it's interesting, this kind of characterization of the binary between natural and non-natural things. Like, everything is natural, right? Everything comes from nature. There is nothing in our existence that doesn't come from nature. It always reminds me of this famous award the Royal Society of Chemistry has here in London in the UK. They've got an ongoing prize of £1 million for anyone who can find anything that isn't chemical. Because, you know, one of the things that people like to proclaim on products is like chemical free. It's like, well, congratulations if you've managed that one, invented an entirely new form of matter. I think that work that I showed before, the Gunnar Johansson stuff on biological motion, shows that we have an evolved sensitivity to all of that stuff. And I think that's one of the reasons that we engage in why we've always been so interested in the figure in motion, because it's universal, universal everything. I think the other thing is that thinking about those themes that we've split our work up into in the studio, this kind of theme of future humans that you can see on the website if you go there, about objects and things and people and in motion. But another one is an important thing is future nature, right? Thinking about where nature might go in the future. And one of those recent film projects that we worked on is one called Nature Always Wins, that shows this kind of representation of various, you know, titanic pieces of human architecture, but rewilded by the hand of nature. And I think that's really true, and I find that quite comforting. You know, I always think of that Shelley poem, Ozymandias, when, you know, this poem and it says, look upon my works and despair, and the only bit of that King of Kings works anymore is an upstretched hand and a turned over head in the middle of the desert. So I don't think we're ever going to beat nature, but I think we have to think about, as Nell said, new ways of dealing with this, and technology is going to be both a help and a hindrance in that. But ultimately, it has to come down to our own responsibility about how we decide to use these very powerful tools that we've been blessed with.
And for me, coding and creative coding is, you know, as a community that probably we would associate our work with. I mean, I sort of don't see it as something that's incongruous with the natural world, or I think code is just a fantastic way to create experiences, to learn more about the world, to do whatever. You know, code is just the kind of basis on which we can do loads of these things. And so why, you know, we should all be thinking about how it can help us better understand the world, either through creative practice or through other types of projects and games or whatever it might be.
It's all code, right? Language is code, dance is code, human movement is code. I've heard that DNA is code as well. So that's obviously got something going on there. If you look into some of the stuff around digital physics as well, maybe computation is the basis of all reality, right? Maybe at that lowest of all levels, the universe is in fact a computation computing itself, and that's what reality is the result of this ongoing computation writ large. As Nell said, you know, these perceptions, we are so limited in our perceptions, it's almost laughable, right? One of the things I like to do in my teaching on my first day, which is the other half of my life apart from universal everything, is I like to get all my students to stick their thumbs out, right? And then for them to realize that they have a blind spot in their vision, right? And lots of students have never experienced that before. And, you know, there are these kind of shrieks of terror when they realize that, in fact, their entire visual perception system is a total illusion and just as much received as any other thing that they perceive. On the code thing as well, you know, when I was growing up, I read Lord of the Rings and all I wanted to be was Gandalf, right? All I wanted to be was a wizard. And I realized recently that I've achieved my ambition, right? Because I use code, which is words of power, to change the world. And I think that's really is what it is. And you could say magic, as the kind of cliche of it, is also a use of codes, a use of different terms, of different ways of navigating. And particularly, I think that thing that Nell said about this idea of embodied interaction, that this doesn't just have to be text-based code, right? You can dance with this, you can move with this, you can sleep with this. It doesn't just have to be this one rather, you know, Western, Northern tendency to trying to render everything in text. I can't remember the choreographer who said it was, but I think it was like, you know, I wouldn't dance it if I could explain it, right? And I think there's something very interesting about thinking about things in that way.
Yeah, one thing that I'm hearing a lot here is this language around perception. It makes me think about, you know, the way in which the 19th century there were these kind of optical tools that extended the human eye and kind of afforded, through technology, an extension and amplification of human embodiment and experience. And so the way that you're talking about that, and how not just you know, using these tools and technologies as a way of new forms of perception, but also new ways of living, moving, being in the world. And I'm interested, you know, you talked a little bit about embodied learning and cultivating that new kinds of embodied engagement. Like, how do you see, what are some of the projects that you've been working on that sustain that kind of work? And how do you see technology kind of supporting you in that?
Should I go, Joel?
Go for it.
Yeah,
No?
you said it first. I'm going to blame you.
Well, I think the embodied learning is not something new, like, and that's definitely not something attributable to technology. Just to be clear, it's the idea of learning through doing, ultimately, or learning through embodiment of the task. So something as simple as throwing something to each other as you learn to count. You know, I'm not going to teach grandma to suck eggs here. I'm sure a lot of you know more about this than I do. But what we're interested in from our point of view is experiential learning or embodied learning. And that might be about a subject, like in a traditional way, or it might be about a story, or, you know, a different way to tell a story is through an embodied way. So, you know, again, we're interested in kind of windows into story worlds and different types of screens or different types of technologies allowing us to do that and look at things in different ways. One project that we were looking at, and I mentioned the science institution in Germany that we're working with, Mavis Fraunhofer. But one of the projects we're looking at the moment is we just released a project right in the middle of the pandemic, great timing, which barely anyone's seen because the gallery shut about 3 times, but it's called The Tides Within Us. And that's ultimately taking a body scan and revealing it in different screens. And we're looking at how we move that into virtual reality, or to use different kinds of technologies to reveal the human body. But what we're interested in, and we're researching with those guys, is, well, if we take someone inside the body, again, people have done that before, using immersive technologies, how do we present a narrative about what the body is and how it's connected to the natural world, or how it functions, and how do we test whether or not people understand more, feel more empathy towards a certain situation or a certain illness, or understand better what to eat, or can you change behavior based on understanding some of those things? And if we reveal the body, or the inside of the body, I should say, in certain ways, will that help? I mean, these are all very, very nascent questions, like in terms of the research, but we're just kind of exploring that, and taking an artist first perspective on that is a very key kind of lens for us. So it's not about us deciding to be scientists, because we're not, or us trying to be something we're not. It's about what's a creative perspective on this, and can it help and contribute something to those other communities of researchers or academics. I hope that sort of answered your question. But I mean, I don't know, Joel, you guys are doing such that project about hydrogen is just so beautiful. It's not the same, but, you know, I feel like I already learned something about hydrogen I didn't know just from watching that animation sequence.
Right. I think there is something, yeah, well, it's interesting that you talking about that project with Fraunhofer in Germany was interesting, because it made me think of a project that we've been engaging with at Universal Everything. In fact, a new part of Universal Everything, or a sister studio called Everyone Forever. Whereas if you could think of, you know, Universal Everything as a playful studio, you might think of Everyone Forever as a caring studio. And that play care axis, which was inspired to me by David Graeber, sadly departed over the same period of this awful pandemic that we're living through at the moment. This caring idea, and thinking about one of the projects we've been working on with some time, which I'll pop the URL in the chat. I think I can send to everyone. Can I send it panelists and attendees? Yeah. So this is a project we've been working on for some time that there isn't much we can show publicly yet, but we're working with Samantha Gallivan, who's an amazing orthopedic surgeon working here in London, and her project, or her research at Imperial College London, is actually about looking at embodied knowing in craft practice, and actually drawing parallels between surgery and the sensitivity that surgeons get with their hands and their sense of touch, and drawing parallels between that, between artistic practice around sculpture and other craft tactilities, as it were. But what we're using this idea to do is we're trying to investigate if we can make a visualization tool to allow patients and staff to communicate by visualizing their pain in a creative way. Can they actually, what can that happen? You know, first of all, as an accurate communication tool, but maybe possibly in the future, thinking about how that act of visualization could reduce the actual symptoms of pain and other things like that. So that's one of the things that really excites me about this kind of embodied knowing and this multisensory knowing, is that it could have not just, I don't mean just, it's a great result to have understanding around knowledge and artistic practice, but also going through to actual like therapeutic outcomes as well. And that certainly feels to me, as a non-scientist, truthful, that when you engage in an artistic practice, you are engaging in some sense in a healing practice of some kind as well.
I love that. I also love what you're talking about with the play and care axes kind of informing the work that you're doing. It really kind of grounds what can be often understood as a very disembodied experience, particularly as we depart screens and enter the world of AR and VR. So you have touched a little bit already on how the possibility of moving beyond and outside the screen, and the kind of potential that you see for AR and VR technologies. I'm curious, you know, with the work that you've done in the space around like creating large scale physical, like large scale work in large spaces that involve a physical audience. You know, I'm thinking of Digital Revolution at the Barbican in 2014, which Universal Everything participated in, as did Marshmallow Laser Feast. So these sorts of experiences really seem to be attracting a lot of energy and interest at this moment. As we look past COVID, you know, I mean, the examples you've given with embodied learning are there's a sense of kind of intimacy and care there. So I'm curious with, you know, how you might understand that work translated into these large scale participatory experiences. You know, what are the kind of theoretical, conceptual underpinnings informing this kind of work? And, you know, what are they a big part of the work you're creating now because of social distancing? Will they be work that you're doing in the next few years? Nell, if you have something to add.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, being with an audience live is such a fundamental part of what MLF does and has done, that I mean, we all live in hope, I think, that that, you know, this is going to keep going, and we will be together again, and we'll present live work. I mean, we've been, I think, Joel, you guys too, like, we have released stuff in, like, some galleries have kept going. Like, we released a piece in Next Museum in Amsterdam, we released the piece in York, The Ties Within Us. So we have been doing screen-based, you know, or kind of enclosed rooms kind of stuff over this year, and I don't see that going. Our next, a big project we're working on is called Sweet Dreams at the moment, or we're fundraising for this kind of big feature length, and it will absolutely take form as a location-based experience, for want of a better or less jargony title, or a kind of, it's a future of screen, it's a story world, you know, which is not a new concept, but presented through multiple types of screen technology live in person to an audience. And then we're really interested in how we explore that as an online or kind of web-based experience and connect those worlds together. What we did with Dream recently that I briefly mentioned was, we couldn't do something that we work with one theatre festival, one massive theatre organisation, people like us who specialise in sort of live digital experiences, and the Philharmonia Orchestra, and the four of us, like, we're all like driven to live and being with our audiences all the time. So it was really incongruous with what we ultimately wanted to do. We had to pivot this whole thing that we designed for a big old shopping centre to be online. But it was a fantastic experience to do that, and to really understand how we tell that story, how we craft it. And we did with some research partners on that project, we did some really great research about accessibility to digital devices. And I know there's a question kind of sitting here, which I'm not going to answer in directly, but we learned, you know, most people have access to smartphones and computers, and indeed not everyone does. We learned that most people, but again, not everyone has access to this level of internet connection, so we can kind of get this level of quality of graphic image to them. So we did a lot of research about how to reach people, and then understood what our best bet was in terms of getting this piece to as many people as we possibly could. And we're not just going to forget that, what we've learned and what we've done. We're not just going to go, we'll put that in the pandemic box, we're only going to go and do that work when we have to. I think the future is about blended worlds, and blending those kind of reaching audiences in multiple, you know, countries, reaching people in different ways, bringing windows into worlds with multiple forms, and choosing what's right for the story you want to tell or the experience you're designing. I don't think and often if an opportunity presents itself to you, or a situation presents itself to you, the beauty of being creative is that you respond to that environment or that situation. But there's no question that being a live audience member and creating things for live audiences is completely at the heart of what we enjoy doing and creating. So I don't ever want to get rid of that.
Joel?
I think one of the reasons that I was really excited to join Universal Everything was the opportunity to combine the quality of art direction and aesthetic with this kind of opportunity of real-time interaction. And I think a lot of the work, because Universal Everything was founded back in 2004 by Matt Pike, and then has been remote only since then, and that was kind of a pragmatic reason to keep costs under control, but has ended up being actually a big plus point now, of course, in terms of the pandemic, but also in terms of flexibility to engage with the best people around the world. But I think we've only really scratched the surface of the possibilities in the area of like large-scale participatory experiences. The Future You project that I showed a little bit of at the Barbican was a great experience in terms of combining kind of cinema quality, real-time visuals with machine learning and body-based interaction. You know, for us as a studio, that's the most exciting thing. That's the reason that we're doing things, is to see people's response and to have that playful thing that I spoke about a little bit earlier. Unfortunately, I can't talk about some of the large-scale participatory experiences that we're currently engaged in, but I would just say watch this space. I can't wait to go and experience some of MLF's work in person. I think there's this thing going on with, you know, cliche terms being thrown around like the new normal and stuff like that. And, you know, ironically, 100 years on since the last big global pandemic, we're going to have another roaring 20s, I think, where certain parts of society are going to be spending and interacting in possibly excessive ways. But that won't be true for everyone. And I think that the danger of the emergence that's about to happen as we go out into kind of physical interaction again is that all it will do will be to heighten the divides that were already in society before. And that's a worrying thing. You know, technology is not a panacea. There's no silver bullet to any of this stuff. But I think, as Nell said before, I think the real potential of digital technology is to give people other perceptions that they couldn't have accessed before. And particularly I'm interested in areas around things about this sense of the fear of the other, right, which seems to have been very prevalent in global societies and re-emerging in many ways. And I just hope that we don't follow the path that happened 100 years ago, which was an inevitable march to totalitarianism and more extremism. But of course, in the 20s, you know, there were these extraordinary moments of fantastic artistic creation and everything else like that. But there was a very dark undercurrent happening as well. So I guess it's all our responsibility, really, to try and to do this in a more inclusive, non-binary, more engaging, less northern, more global way. But I don't have the answers.
Yes.
And there's a question from Anna in the Q&A which talks about accessibility to technology, and it's, you know, it's exactly right. No, the permeation of headsets in homes is really low. It's really expensive, and I think we're really interested in how it doesn't matter what the technology is. You just take it to the people and create worlds that they can come and experience in different ways, and we, that, you know what I mean, and then so that it doesn't matter if the technology is in the home or not. I kind of sorry, go on.
I interrupted you.
No.
I'm sorry. There was a thing about that it's really interesting around VR and headsets, right? Because there are huge sections of the global population that cannot put on a headset, right? For a variety of reasons, religious or physical or otherwise. And also now with this very you know, this plague that we found that can be transmitted so easily, there's a big question in my head about what the feasibility of those things are in the future, right? Like, will anyone accept that again, right? Will anyone accept the possibility of putting on a VR headset that they've just watched someone else get very excited into, cough, exclaim, and everything else? Will that ever be possible again? I don't, you know, I don't know. We will see.
Well, yeah, and like, as someone who's, you know, got a massive portfolio of work, who I'm hoping that they will, because we've toured a lot of those projects and intend to tour more. There's a lot of research and a lot of technology in terms of hygiene and all of that sort of stuff, which is being you know, UV cleaning and all of that sort of stuff. I think you're right, Joel, which is like, yeah, will we see the public just go, no, that's not interesting? But by the looks of it, I don't think we are seeing that, like by the trends that we're doing, or the bookings that we're taking, and what we're seeing galleries book or museums book in terms of these things. Like, not, I don't think that's the case, but I think it's a really valid point, and that's the whole point about not getting stuck in one type of technology, right? It's about a kind of using everything within your toolbox or your palette to kind of create things which ultimately are for as many people as that story was designed to be told to.
I think it's actually an interesting opportunity. Sorry, I'm interrupting Vanessa now as well. I'm going 3 for 3. This thing about what it means to be inclusive around all of these things in terms of access and technology. Of course, there's this economic question, right? Like VR headsets are still very expensive, but I think Moore's law will bring that down to a more reasonable price just because of kind of consumer pressures and everything else like that. And I think, you know, we all know that Apple and other people are working on headsets, and then when everyone's got a headset, then a lot of those problems will go away. I think there's still the kind of barriers in terms of what people are comfortable doing for religious or otherwise reasons, but I think that can open up, that doesn't need to be a negative, I think it can open up actually a positive, which is actually a discussion, a wider discussion about kind of ableism in our society, right? Which is one of the things that I always bring up with students as well, is like, I like everyone to raise their hand who's left-handed, right? So as a left-handed person, I was immediately aware that the world wasn't built for me from immediately, right? Because all the door handles are on the wrong side of the doors, for goodness sake, right? And I think for right-handers, that's sometimes a bit difficult to understand. And I think there's some research actually that greater than average percentage of US presidents have been left-handers because it forced them into an empathic response. That's my theory. But I just want to say a little quote from one of my favorite people talking about bodies and rejected bodies and how the body is taken in society, which is Susan Wendell, who I'd really recommend as anyone to read, particularly her book, The Rejected Body, which is not only do physically disabled people have experiences which are not available to the able-bodied, they are in a better position to transcend cultural mythologies about the body because they cannot do the things the able-bodied feel they must do in order to be happy or normal and sane. If disabled people were truly heard, an explosion of knowledge of the human body and psyche would take place. And I think the reason I'm saying that quote is because I think that follows with technology as well, right? And there is a potential for an explosion of knowledge to be enabled by these things. We just
but what's necessary there then is to invite and center the experiences of disabled people in the design, not only of technologies, but the experiences that you're creating. I mean, VR is notoriously inaccessible if you are blind or have low vision, if you are deaf or hard of hearing, you know, and disabled folks have a long history of innovation with technology that's very different from how, say, tech companies think about innovation. So I would suggest that, you know, as we move forward with the learnings from this pandemic, that's something that we can try and think about as we create these new collectives and these new conversations about who these experiences are for and how we create them.
Yeah, absolutely. That inclusive designs are kind of huge thing.
Yeah.
And
also, it's not. Oh, sorry, I'm not going to interrupt you now. Shut up.
No, it wasn't. I was just a reflection. I agree with what Vanessa's saying, and I think as people who are creative, like artists, we often, like as a producer, I say this, I'm often in conversation with directors who have a vision for what they want to create and how they want that to be. And then it's like, well, it's nothing if it's, you know, who's this for? I think is often the question. And that's a standard kind of audience question. But I don't think directors are always necessarily asking themselves that question first. It's egocentric, right? It's like, what do I want to create? What do I want to birth into the world? And, you know, it's a process. And I completely agree on the technologies as well as the design process that we go through.
Yeah, especially as we talk about embodied technologies. I mean, embodiment is just not this catch-all term. There's so many bodies and so many experiences of embodiment and of perception too.
And it's a spectrum, right? Like we all know that, we know this already, like the only place for binaries is in computers. Like everywhere else they're complete lie, right? And this idea of abled or disabled or whatever else, it's such a spectrum of experiences that I think, yeah, it would be surprised. People reveal themselves. Lots of people don't realize who they're encountering in their everyday lives anyway, and perhaps they would be surprised at the different level of abilities that they were if they truly understood them and knew them.
Yeah, well, this is an interesting moment to maybe invite you to discuss a little bit your processes. So I've seen in the question in the chat is a lot of like, oh, how can I get into immersive media? So to actually develop and realize the projects that you do, might you talk a little bit about what your process is for moving from an idea to this final moment? Who do you involve along the way? How do you work with people and ultimately incarnate these experiences that we are available to us?
Do you want to go first, Joel?
Okay, I'll go first. Draw, and then draw again, and then draw a bit more, and then talk, and then laugh, and then play, and be patient. And, you know, I think one of the things that Universal Everything is in a lucky position of being able to do is to engage in internal R&D projects, right? So we're able to engage in internal research and development that doesn't even necessarily see the light of day. Or publicly, and if they do, they tend to act as a calling card for the kind of work that we want to do in the future. And we've been lucky enough to work with other people that have supported us in doing that. And I think a good example of a calling card that's been useful for us as a company is this Screens of the Future project that was just an internal speculative project, and we suddenly start. Sorry,
it's one of my favorites.
I know, I will love it. And it was amazing because we started getting calls from people around the world going, where can we get those goldfish screens from? And we had to kind of patiently explain that they were in fact CGI and didn't exist yet. That's not a hint to the thing I was saying before, by the way. We aren't doing goldfish screens, or are we? No, we're not. But I think that Screens of the Future project was amazing because then people realized that that was something that we could do, and then that engaged us with other companies and organizations around the world. And there's something to be said for making something of such a visual quality, or maybe I should say sensory quality, but these are primarily visual, the visual things, of such a visual quality that it enables people to take the imaginative leap to that. And that's kind of, I think, a good justification and reason for aesthetics and high quality visualizations, because it stops you from in your head going, that's a tech demo, right? And I think one of the things that often happens in immersive work is low hanging fruit is plucked, right, eagerly by technologists and other people around the world. And they're not necessarily thinking about making something that doesn't scream tech demo. They're doing the kind of Jurassic Park thing of like, oh, I wonder if this is possible, instead of thinking about if they should or how they should do that. And I think that's one of the really exciting things about both Universal Everything and Marshmallow Laser Feast, is that I think we can act as like an interpreting agent between kind of PhD level cutting level research, and act as a kind of transmuting force, as it were, in the kind of, you know, alchemic sense of trying to find gold that was already there, but exposing it in ways that are different. So I think, yeah, that's our process internally. And I think no matter what the technology is, and I've seen this by speaking to Nell and the rest of the team at MLF and everyone at Universal Everything, is it's very human, right? It's drawing, it's laughing, it's giggling with each other. And I think that's kind of the best test, right? That if it doesn't work at that level and doesn't excite you at that level, then throwing all the tech in the world and budget in the world won't make it good. And that's another one of my critiques sometimes of the wider world, or maybe the wider scene, is quite often you'll see something and I'm like, okay, well, so what's the idea? And they're like, no, it's a massive telly. It's a really big screen. And you're like, okay, what's the idea? And they're like, no, we spent 10 million on this screen. Look at the screen. And you're like, okay. So yeah, that's what I think about it.
Yeah, as similar. The process is, it kind of depends. Usually it's through conversation, it's through some bit of inspiration, whether that's come from, you know, what one of our kids has done, or what you know, a quote from somewhere. It might be very highbrow, it might be incredibly lowbrow, but there's often a kind of piece of inspiration, or there's a book or a story or a piece of history, whatever it is, that is not unique to any artistic process, which is just finding an idea, which is a nucleus, and it keeps growing and growing. And then it I think the point about you know, both of our companies is that we're collectives, so we're groups of people who understand the value of bouncing ideas around. And you know, you'll one of you know, I'll have a discussion with the director or the whole three of the directors and co-founders and talk about what the idea is, and then we'll take it to someone else in the company, and the questions will make it morph into something completely different, or hold it up, interrogate it in a completely different way based on that person's lived experience, skill base, whatever else that'll be. So collaboration is like a massive part of what we do, and understanding the value that everyone can bring. A lot of the projects we do are not just MLF, they're in collaboration with other people, whether or not that's someone who's really phenomenal at a certain computer program, or another organization, or a few, or a funder or a research institution. So bringing them into the fold, and that can be incredibly painful, don't get me wrong. The process is not always brilliant, but often it's a blending. We learn so much, right? We often see ourselves as, like Joel was saying about the interpretation element, I would have described that in the past as like we sit above all these other siloed in sort of practices. So theatre, you know, knows what theatre does and it's done in a certain way, and you know, art galleries work in a certain way, and you've got to learn. And I feel like I've had sort of these mini masters or PhD degrees in all these different like industries over the past few years of like, oh shit, I've got to learn, like I've got to learn the business model, like how do you work, what's the kind of etiquette, like how do you talk to each other, how do you work, how do you design things or create things together, how does your audience interact with you, how do you talk about your audience, and we as the producing team are kind of finding all this stuff out, and then understanding how to frame the creative in the context of that collaborator or that industry that we're kind of engaging with at that point. The beauty of that is we can then blend it all together. But in realistic terms, I don't think the process is any different. It's just that you throw technology in there, and it brings amazing possibilities and real difficulties all at the same time.
Yeah. Great. Well, in the time that we have left, I wanted to touch on a few of the questions that have come up in the Q&A. So Rachel Arthur asked a question. Says, you know, really, thank you for your insightful, interesting talks. I'm really intrigued to hear your thoughts around the ethical challenges surrounding technologies such as AI and VR. Do the positives outweigh any potential negatives? How careful do we need to be in our advancement of them? I love Nell's point and the possibilities in envisioning things we cannot see ourselves, but where does the line lie in any danger this could create?
It's impossible, isn't it? This is one of the great problems of humanity, is that we're endlessly curious, and if you decide not to do something, then it's invariably true that someone else somewhere else will not have the ethical considerations that you had in order to do that. I think there have been a few times in history where an entire group of people have decided not to pursue research into somewhere, and I think one of those was I think there was a decision in the 1970s amongst researchers around biological and chemical warfare that they would pull back from the precipice that they could see coming ahead of them. I have severe doubts that anything like the kind of ethical strength and fortitude that those researchers showed in the 1970s will be exercised in a similar way around machine learning or virtual reality, for that matter. I think if anything's shown that the commercial possibilities surrounding some of these technologies is so great that people can't get them out of their minds. But I think there's a deeper political question about that, about how we're conducting ourselves in a consumerist, capitalist, global society that aren't going to be answered by technologists. It needs to be answered by politicians and the world as a whole to make those kind of decisions. That said, we can all as individuals make better decisions about the world, and of course we are all only that, humans ultimately. Some people seem to have lost track a little bit of that in various different political circles around the world. I think I can feel the change happening though. One of the things that's amazing about teaching, especially teaching people in their late teens and early 20s that are doing their undergraduate degrees, is it just gives me so much hope, because, you know, idiots like me who are just turned 40, Generation X, or I think I'm a Zennial by strict definitions. We just as much as the boomers, we've messed up the world. But I feel that a lot of the discussions that we're having aren't even going to be discussions for the teenagers and 20-year-olds that are coming through now, or at least I pray and hope it is that. Kicking it down the can is a thing that humans are very good at, but I feel like it's changing, and I can only hope for that.
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's massive. And we've sat on panels before just discussing that, and I often find myself going like, we use these technologies, we don't often question where they've come from. I mean, we don't do much with AI really as a studio, but the exciting thing about the world that we operate in is the advancement of softwares, hardwares, and the kind of public's ability or literacy around all of those technologies. And the pandemic has definitely kind of expedited that. But we often kind of, we don't question, or we should question more. Often people who want to fund this work have got commercial interest and they want to sell units, right? They want to sell the headsets, or they want to sell whatever it is. And we're more and more taking that into consideration. It's just like, don't go to certain people for money, because they will, I mean, this is the same thing with research, right? In all fields, but because they will compromise what you want to make, or how you're going to make it. So we often, we think about that a bit more. We think about the topics that we're trying to get out into the world. We, most recently, we, as another example, we're sort of, a lot of the NFT stuff that's going on, and this sort of carbon around that, and it's a whole nother discussion, but like, when's the right time to make a move, or how do you want to say something about that technology? I think it's like understanding your voice a bit more, and really refining that, and pairing it to the kind of work you put out into the world. So there's things like that we can do. Where's the line? I think was part of the question. I think that depends on who you are and what your stance is, right, on certain topics, because my line might be different to yours when it comes to body and kind of human body stuff, because of my religious or otherwise stance, but yours might be somewhere else. And it's incredibly difficult to navigate, and it totally depends on the topic you're dealing with. But I think we can probably, maybe not exclusively, but one thing that I think is a real problem that we should all agree on is that the people who are designing these technologies are not representative of the people that ultimately should have access to them in the world. And that's a fundamental problem. And that's the one we should all, try and change. And we don't do enough, but we should be doing our bit in terms of like skilling up, bringing people in, and kind of into our teams, and more in terms of the skills agenda and all of that sort of stuff that Joel's kind of mentioning. But I think that once the AIs are designed by the right kind of, with the right level of diversity of people thinking about them and designing them and coding them, then I think we will be better on the right track to
absolutely agree. I mean, this seems to be a recurring kind of theme of this conversation, right? Like, who are we making to be part of these conversations, these design and these experiences. We are over time, and there's so much more to say, but I'd like to honor the time that you've already had here and spent with us. So before we close, I'd just like to share a little bit about Immersive Arts Alliance. So Immersive Arts Alliance is a nonprofit organization. We rely on contributions for individuals, corporations, and foundations to support the development and presentation of our exhibitions, performances, and education programs. So coming up, in partnership with Catherine Clark Gallery and Boxblur, we're presenting the San Francisco premiere of Shimon Atti's Night Watch, a floating media installation that will travel the San Francisco Bay for a week in September 2021. Night Watch features video portraits on the 20-foot wide LED screen. Displayed on the screen are silent video portraits of 12 refugees who are granted political asylum in the United States. If you'd like to support this project, you can make a tax-deductible donation at immersiveartsalliance.org. So with that, there's so much that's come up in the Q&A. There's still questions in the Q&A and in the chat. I hope that this is a conversation that might continue in another form elsewhere. Thank you so much for your time, Joel and Nell. I really appreciate this conversation and the thoughtfulness that you brought to it.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Live long and prosper. And don't worry, we've already won.
Thanks for having us. Good luck with the events.
Right. Thank you. Take care, everyone. Bye.
Bye.